What's up, everybody? I'm Little Loop, and this is part two of my, little mini series on just basically what I'm going to be sharing about my experiences working in radio, television, film, in the music industries. If you haven't seen part one, check it out. I'm going to put a link in the description. You can go back and watch kind of the first half of this. In this video, I'm going to mostly be focusing on my radio experience. That's kind of where I left off on the last video. And I'll also be just kind of giving some advice if you're starting out and you're just kind of stuck, or maybe if you're kind of at a point where, you don't really know where to go from here. And so if you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe, follow along, give me some suggestions in the comments if there's kind of more that I haven't touched on here, and let's get started. So, where I'm at right now, I currently work, I guess you could say like my day job is at a major media company. So, I have been doing radio as like a, I guess, side gig or day job, whatever you want to call it, since I graduated college. So, we're talking, I guess at this point, it's been about 7 years, almost. So it was kind of funny how I got into that. I didn't study any kind of like broadcasting or programming or anything like that in college. I got basically a general studies degree because I just changed my major so many times, transferred schools, dropped out for a while. Like, it was not a clear 4 year process for me. I never really wanted to go to college, so I just kind of, it was one of those things that I had a family that was very like, if you're smart, you go get a 4 year degree and get a high paying job and all that stuff. So I was like, oh, okay. And I spent most of my time in college just trying to do something that would be lucrative and hating it and quitting a lot because that's not what I wanted to do ultimately. But when I was about to graduate, I saw that they were doing a job fair, and I figured, I knew I wanted to do something relating to music. So before I went to the job fair, I looked on the website ahead of time, got, made like a little list of all the places I wanted to hit up, all the booths, because they were just basically the radio stations were the only kind of music related jobs I saw there. And I didn't know any of these stations. I just was like, yeah, working for a radio station, that'd be cool. And so I went there deliberately towards the end, was dressed up, had my resume ready to go. And by the time I got there, which I think there'd been like, I think I got there like right in the last half hour or so of the time that they were supposed to be doing the job fair. And by the time I got there, almost everybody had already packed up and left. There were a handful of booths that were still there, but they were maybe starting to break down. And I noticed that all these stations that I wanted to go visit were at one booth. So I was like, and they were still there. And I figured, oh man, that's convenient. I can just hit up this one booth and be on my way, and I'll have done what I came here to do. Well, I went over there, and there were three people working the booth. There was, the main guy that was in charge of the, hiring process. He ended up hiring me later and becoming my boss the whole time I worked at that company. And then I guess his two kind of sidekicks. And so I ended up chatting up with them for a while, and I guess I made a good impression because he ended up calling me in for an interview. And in the interview, he even told me, he was like, if I had to hire you based off your resume alone, then I would have not called you in for an interview. Like, your resume sucks, basically, because I had no qualifications for or experience in any of the stuff that he was looking for. But he stressed that, he wanted to have a unique, I guess, workforce or, group of employees, like kind of a diverse workplace. And he was like, you're not like any of the other people that we have here. So, he basically was interested in bringing me on board for that. And so I lucked out. And it's funny because I always consider that boss to be, I always compare him to Michael Scott from The Office, the American one, like the Steve Carell version, because he always seemed more like a friend than a boss, and was always just jovial and in a good mood and joking around. And a lot of the jokes he would make were very like, if anybody else said these things, they would be like going to HR because you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that. But the way he just had a way about him where you couldn't help but laugh, and and he let people get away with a lot, because he just kind of had that maybe like paternal kind of vibe, and so I ended up working at that company for almost 6 years, and that place, it turned out all these stations were Christian music, which I don't listen to, so I had no knowledge of any of that. I just was like, oh, radio stations. Yeah, they were all Christian music stations or like Christian talk stations, which I didn't like. None of that was in my wheelhouse, so I just was kind of like a fish out of water there. But everybody was always really nice to me, and I never really felt, like, I mean, it definitely was like kind of out of the loop when they would geek out about certain artists or something, and I'd be like, I don't know who that is. But but everybody was pretty cool there. Surprisingly, I was expecting a lot of judgment because I'm like, I'm not even Christian, and I'm like, I don't, So I was like, what am I doing here? But it ended up being a really positive job. I've made friends from that job that I still talk to now, still work with now, and eventually what ended up happening was that company, or that station that we all worked for, primarily their big money maker, got bought out, and so all of us, including my boss, got laid off. And fortunately, he, I guess, again, made a good enough impression, because I mean, I stayed with this company through COVID. They laid off a lot of their workforce. I was one of the lucky ones that got asked to come back after that. And then once everybody got laid off, my boss put in a good word for me at the place that I work at now, which basically, I kind of moved over there and started doing the same stuff, and along with a handful of other people that I worked with at the other company, and so I was able to get hired at this place just from still having a relationship with my, a good working relationship with my job, or with my boss from my other job. And because I mean, when I try to apply to this company now, even having that other place on my resume, I kept running into like technical difficulties. I couldn't even, like, they had an online application portal that you had to make, and I couldn't even, I'm like technologically challenged. I don't know. If there's any kind of issue, like, I will be the one to experience it, because I just could not get the website to work. So if I had to just freelance apply to this place on my own, like, I would have never probably gotten the job. And same goes, with that other place I worked at. If I hadn't gone to that career fair and I had just applied online or something, would never have gotten that job. And so fortunately, my boss at the other place knew the guy that became my boss at this place, and basically had the same role, and was able to get me the hookup and be like, hey, hire this person. And they personally emailed me and said, basically bypassed the portal, system, since that wasn't working. And, he just had me directly send him all my information, and they were able to arrange to hire me that way. But, I mean, it just goes to show again, it's not always what it's who and I feel like that's a big kind of theme throughout this whole process, at least for me, because a lot of this stuff, it wasn't, a lot of the times, and you think about like people that are famous, some of these people, not everybody, of course, but like there are a lot of people I feel like that are incredibly well known, that you look at them and you're like, how is this person famous? Like, they're not good. But I feel like a lot of times it's probably they were in a similar boat where maybe they didn't have the chops, but they knew somebody, they knew the right person that gave them a shot, and that's all it took, and so, and it's funny because this station I'm working at now also plays music that I don't have a lot of knowledge of. It's the only music they play is country music, and while I'm more familiar with country music than Christian music, it's again not my choice of what I would listen to in my free time for the most part. There's a handful of songs that I can get down with, but like a majority of it, I'm like, I would not listen to this on my own. This is just, and same thing with like concerts and stuff. I'm like, they'll be like, oh, we have tickets to see whatever artist, or oh, so-and-so's here. And I'll be like, who? Like, I don't know. I'm not hip to any of the people. And so kind of similar, to the other place in that regard. And then in terms of the talk stations, they do conservative news talk and sports talk, and I'm neither conservative nor into sports, so it's like kind of limits my options, I guess, at this place. But it's still, I feel like, good experience in terms of like having a place to work that does put me in a position where I'm meeting artists, I'm meeting people in the industries. And I enjoy getting to hear different perspectives and meet new people that otherwise I might not have normally, been exposed to or interacted with. And I have been surprised, at this workplace, much like the last workplace, by how much they value diversity and having people from all walks of life, different viewpoints. A lot of the people there, I mean, it's hit or miss, right? You never know. And, obviously don't like get too political at work or anything, but I mean, just hearing some of the stuff they say on the radio, I'll be like, uh-oh, I'm in danger. But then, walking around the workplace, people are chill. They're super cool and super open, friendly, and so it's just so interesting to me seeing behind the scenes of, what you would hear on the radio versus being in that environment. And it's very corporate-y, so it's like how much of that is just people, doing what they got to do to toe the corporate line. I don't know. But I find that so fascinating that, it's the things that they say and that they're kind of have to say. I'm sure some, I don't know the specifics on the talk stuff, but, I feel like everybody's got to answer to somebody. There's a hierarchy there, and I don't know how far that hierarchy goes, but I just think it's interesting that there's that kind of duality of, on the one hand, they're like, no, diversity's bad, but then walking around, it's like, no, they want diverse. Like, you go to these meetings where they're like, we need to be more diverse. Like, it's like, you're like, what? I don't know. It's crazy. But I enjoy it. It's fun. Like, I don't know. To me, it's like I get to see, I get to peek behind the curtain and be like, oh, so this is what they're really, they'll say one thing, but they're really, kind of a little different way. And which one's the genuine, which way do they really feel? I don't know. Maybe it's both. I don't know. But I just think it's fascinating. And it just goes to show that you can't always take people at face value. You can't always write off things just because you don't immediately understand them, or, you can't make snap judgments or form these opinions of people. And that just goes for anything, not just like trying to get somewhere in workplaces, but I mean, just for life in general. I feel like it's just good to, not try to make snap judgments. Like, just, I don't know. It just applies to anything, I guess, really. But I will say, when it comes to moving up, because that was kind of my ultimate goal with working at these places, was being an on-air personality. Because I would basically be doing the same thing I'm doing now. But I feel like that is kind of the spot where it can hinder me to not be more in the know when it comes to, for instance, like country music and all the latest artists and having a big, following for that, or, not being up to date on all the latest, news stories, and, having that be a personal passion of mine. Like, if I feel like a lot of the times they can kind of sense when you're faking it and when you're genuinely, passionate about it and interested in it. And at least, for these places that I've worked at, I've worked with a lot of people who really, I mean, this was their dream, this was their goal, this is what they were passionate about. And they're still, they've maybe been working there years, and they still get passed over for people that, they'll hire from like outside the company, somebody to fill this slot, or, it might take them years and years and years of working there in a lesser role before they're even considered for the type of job they really want. And I feel like part of that is just any corporate job in general, like just climbing the ladder. It takes time, and, it's hard because it's like they want people with experience, but it's like, well, how do you get experienced if how do you get there if they won't let people without experience, give it a go? So it's a whole thing. And that's not specific to just one company or another. From what it seems like, I feel like that's kind of how it is across the board to a degree. But one thing I've noticed is I get a lot of calls at work from independent artists, country artists specifically for because of where I work, but people who, maybe they've had their music, released on a, musical distribution service like TuneCore or DistroKid or something like that. Maybe they're signed to like some indie label that nobody's ever heard of. Um, maybe their friends run it or something, or they're being managed by family members. Sometimes that's who calls me. And I get a lot of people who want to know, because our stations are like pretty major corporate stations. It's not like your local independent, publicly owned or college radio or, it's like they have a very specific playlist of what songs they'll play, and they get those straight out of Nashville, and they work directly with labels to kind of create the playlists. And it's not as simple as just, send your album over and we'll play your songs. Like it's very curated. And so and I don't know why they do it that way. I mean, I have an idea why they do it that way. It probably comes down to, whatever industry behind the scenes program they got going on. But I just feel like, and it doesn't just apply to these stations. I feel like the other stations that I listen to, in my free time, whatever rock stations or some, other types of things, it's usually they're playing the same. I feel like they're playing like the same hour and a half to 2 hours worth of music just on repeat all day. I remember when I was a mechanic, I had a coworker who had like just a regular speaker radio system, and he would play stations that I liked, but he would play like the same 2 or 3 radio stations every day, all day. And it was the same songs and it was the same ads, constant, like looped, you know what I mean? And at first when he started doing that, I was like, oh yeah, I love this song. Oh, this is a jam, and I'd be bopping along. But after a few weeks or months of it, I'm like, oh my God, enough. Like, it's made me start to kind of hate hearing the songs that I used to like, that I used to listen to for fun in my free time, because I just got so sick of hearing the same stuff over and over again. And those were like the older, like rock stations. So I'm thinking, at least with these ones that I work at now, they're playing newer stuff typically. So there's always, yeah, it's annoying now, but next year they're going to play different songs that maybe they'll get annoying, but at least it's something new, that you haven't heard a million times. That one, I'm like, those stations that are playing stuff from like the 70s or 80s or what, decades ago, whatever, stuck in the 20th century, but they're still playing, which there's an abundance of stuff to play from those time periods, but it's like they're just playing the same whatever top radio hits of the day. And I mean, I guess that's what people listen to. I guess that's why they do it. But at the same time, I'm like, God, don't, you're playing like the same 2 hits from this one band that's got albums worth of good songs. Play a different song by that band, or something. Broaden people's horizons a bit, I don't know. But that would probably be risky, and I guess it works, and that's why they do it. So they're just going to stick with that. I don't call the shots there, but that would just be like, if I were in charge, that would be how I would handle it personally. But that's, that's why I don't get paid the big bucks, because I don't think like that, I guess. And so that can be hard, because it puts you in this kind of catch-22 where, if you're in that position of wanting to get to that point where these major stations are playing your music and it's getting out there, tons of airplay, you're stuck in this position of like, okay, well, you're expected to in order to get to that level, you're expected to already be signed to a major label, and that has all these connections and, to all these stations and everything. But it's like, well, in order to get signed by a major label nowadays, they expect you to already have a big following, for them to even consider you. So it's like, well, how are you supposed to get this big following without the kind of exposure that they already have? And, it's like, how are you supposed to grow your audience? And so I just kind of, once I saw that other side of it, I grew kind of disillusioned, I guess, with trying to get my songs out there and, win Grammys or get signed by a major label, because it seems like all of that stuff, it's not just randomly chosen. It's all based on really like who you know, like having the right relationships with these people already. And if you don't know those people, I mean, I would have thought like, oh, working in radio would be a good way to meet them and get some connections that way and being exposed to more people in the industry. And it's given me like a better kind of behind the scenes look at how all this stuff operates. But when country artists and their managers or whoever blow through there, or I get calls from agents or stuff like that, I mean, it's like, yeah, I guess in a sense like I'm around them, but they're not going to want some rando being like, hey, you manage so and so, listen to my music, manage me too. Or hey, you're so and so signed with your label, sign me to your label, look what I can do. Like, they don't want that crap. They probably get that like unsolicited submissions and stuff like that constantly, all the time. I'm sure there's so many people doing that, and it's the last thing they want to hear. So I'm not, I feel like that's not the right approach. I feel like the guaranteed way to do it nowadays, and the way that a lot of people have, successful people have kind of gotten their start. If you don't, if you're not a freaking Nepo baby, and you're not just naturally born with connections, or super popular and lucky, and, happen to get the right person's attention, I feel like you kind of just, the guaranteed way to, your best shot at getting there nowadays is to just build all the hype yourself. Like, be everything that you need yourself. You have to be your own label, your own manager, your own publicist, your own, everything. You got to do it all. And it's like, if you're expected to do all these other roles, all these other jobs, when are you going to have time to make music, And I feel like that's kind of the problem that a lot of people have. And I feel like a common complaint that I hear is that music nowadays is just, I don't know about, not necessarily lazy, but kind of simple. Like, it doesn't have the layers of complexity that music, back in the 70s or whatever previous decades, 20th century had. And I feel like that's largely why. I mean, with social media, it's people's attention spans are just diminishing. And, you've got to have something, you got to crank something out frequently. You have to have frequent releases. I have a friend that puts out a new EP, seems like every month. I mean, he is constantly creating new music, and I'm like in awe of him. I'm like, how do you do it, man? It's so, because he does it all himself. And, he hustles, and I really admire him. And I can't, like, I know myself. I get writer's block. It takes me so long because I have all these like elaborate ideas in my head that I can't just crank out in a DAW, so there's certain things that, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people, and I can't say whether this friend does this or not, but I know a lot of artists are starting to implement AI into their music to make it go quicker. It's like, do I really want to take the time to write out sheet music for an entire orchestra and find an orchestra to record it in a studio? Or do I want to just like crank it into this, AI generative thing and just have it crap out whatever part I'm going for? Or, you know what I mean? Or find a whole band to track this demo in a studio, when I could just type in a prompt and say, hey, make this song that sounds like this, and then it's done. And so, I can totally understand the appeal of using AI to just save massive amounts of time in that whole process. But I feel like that's also kind of part of the problem is, you've got like Spotify, probably even YouTube, all these other online kind of music distributors or I guess just places that people go to listen to music, where they have like their own AI artists, like entire artists that are just fake, that don't exist, that they have their own, social media followings that are, their own personas. And I mean, that's becoming like its own genre now. It's just AI generated music. And, I'd be lying if I said there weren't AI generated songs that I freaking jam from time to time. But, in terms of like using it for your own music, I feel like you're sacrificing originality for the sake of convenience, because all those styles came from somewhere. I mean, they have there's nothing really truly original there. And yeah, I mean, real artists have their own influences, and you could argue that there's nothing truly original in that sense either, but at least there's still the potential for innovation if it's coming from a human. If it's coming from AI, it's just this hodgepodge of pre-existing things that it's just kind of like, here you go, like slopping out. And plus there's all these negative environmental impacts from using it. It's just, I mean, like an ethical kind of things. It's, there's just so many issues with that. For me personally, I would just say, like, I could see the temptation, but I would advise against using AI, especially because I know a lot of these artists whose music was used to generate or to train the AI, like, they feel like they've kind of been plagiarized, or, that's been done without their consent. Who knows? I want to say they're probably like filing lawsuits and stuff. I don't know how it's going to shake out, or if it has already, if they've already ruled on it. Like, I don't have like the latest updates on that, but I just know that the easiest way to avoid all of that is to just take the extra time, try to think of something original. It might mean you can't get as many releases out as quickly, and, maybe you'll get buried by the algorithm. But at least at the end of the day, you can be like, I made this is all me, I don't know. And not have to worry about somebody potentially suing you for using their likeness or their music or whatever, to create something that should be yours anyway. So some things that I would say worked against me personally, this may or may not apply to you, but hopefully, if it does, that you're not the only one that's struggling with this. And I've known other people that have kind of had similar, so other artists that are kind of getting a later start in their careers, for the same kind of reasons. With me, I came from kind of this chaotic, dysfunctional childhood. I didn't have very much stability or consistency. Like, anytime I did try to, like, for instance, like, take lessons, they didn't last very long. I was never consistently learning one thing very long. I remember I originally, when I wanted to learn violin, my dad put me in piano lessons because he was like, you need to learn piano before you learn any other instrument, which I can understand the logic behind it. But, at the time and me now, I feel like every instrument has its own distinct feel and sound and vibe. And I feel different depending on which instrument I'm playing. So at the time I was like, I don't want to play piano. I want to play violin. And he put me, because my family, my dad's side, of the family is of Russian descent. So he got me this Russian piano teacher who was just this like very angry, strict old dude. And every time, every week he would be like, did you do your homework? Did you study this piano stuff that I gave you? And I would forget to bring it. And I'd be like, no, I didn't mess with it. And, he would chastise me. And after a while, he just got so sick of like trying to teach me anything that he would just spend our lessons showing me Russian palaces. Like, he had like entire calendar, huge calendars of like the most gorgeous like Russian cathedrals and palaces and all these things, and would tell me all this history, and didn't teach me any piano. I didn't learn any piano. And I think I eventually told my dad one day, like, yeah, we spent, he's like, oh, did you learn anything? It's like, yeah, I learned about this Russian palace or whatever. And he'd be like, okay, yeah, you're not going there again. And like just stuff like that, where it was like, I just didn't, or, if I did, like, for instance, take lessons somewhere, it was for a class, like when I took violin lessons, it was because I was taking a class on violin. Or if I, took guitar lessons, it was so I could play guitar at school, or, flute, so I could play, like, it just, whatever instrument I played in school, I would take lessons just long enough for that class. And then once the class was over, the lessons were over. So I didn't stick with any one instrument super long as a kid. And I had a family that musically, a lot of the people in my family, I mean, I have a couple musicians in my family that really did try to make a go of being musicians. I have several, actually. But nobody ever really supported that as a career. It was always just kind of treated as like a hobby. So it was encouraged as like oh yeah, you can do that for fun in your free time, but you need to do something lucrative for a job, for a career. Like that's not going to make you any money. Don't do that, permanently. And so it was, it was never really like when it came to time for me to, go to college or, do any of the adulting type stuff. When I was like, I want to be a musician, they're like, yeah, no, you're too smart for that. Go do something that makes money. And that kind of led to me spending a lot of time and money as a consequence on, like going to college, taking engineering courses and studying, all these things that in hindsight, that was the hobby. In hindsight, I love learning about like astronomy and physics and, just how things work and stuff like that. A lot of that, I was like, at the time, I was like, well, I find this interesting. Maybe I can make a career out of this. And I reached a point where I was like, woo, like I'm not smart enough to, I'm not that good at math. You know what I mean? I was always bad at math, but I persevered through up until I think Cal 3 was when I was reaching my limit. And then once I got to differential equations, when I'm like, okay, I'm solving a problem and the answer is another problem. Like my brain cannot compute. Like I just couldn't hack that. And so I spent so much time pursuing these careers that made money, but that made me miserable. Like I was not passionate about it. I did not enjoy it. And, maybe that's how they did things back in the day, is they just spent their lives doing stuff that made them miserable and, for the steady paycheck. And I just feel like my generation and newer generations are like, man, life's too short to be miserable. Like you got to do what you enjoy. And so fortunately as an adult, I feel like my family's become more supportive and now they're, on board. They're my cheerleaders. But as like a tween/teen, definitely they were like, no, you need to, make money, which is understandable. You don't want somebody to struggle. So I get that. They wanted something stable for me too. So I know it came from a good place, but I've known other artists that had similar families and that was an ongoing kind of struggle for them because, as an adult meeting people who, like seeing the other side of it, meeting people who had supportive families from the time they were, kids or teenagers and who have, bought them thousands of dollars of music equipment and recording equipment and set them up with little studios in their house and taken them to, or go to every gig that they play or, it's like just seeing the other side of it. I'm like, wow, if I'd had a family that really took me seriously when I said that stuff and really like went all the way to that level, who knows how different things would have turned out. You know what I mean? If I had a family that like Taylor Swift's family, Taylor Swift's parents were not connected, they weren't really like musically whatever, but they had this kid that was like super really passionate about it from a young age and they freaking uprooted their whole family and moved to Nashville to like support her career, to grow her and like meet people and network for her. And I'm like, damn, but again, it's like I didn't have parents from the time I was 11. And so I think the rest of my family just was trying to make it to adulthood. They're like, as long as I make it to 18 and I'm in one piece and I'm healthy and I'm not like on the streets, like then they've done their job. So, I can't like fault them for that, but it's definitely, I feel like, one of those things that might be partially responsible for me getting a later start in life with the music stuff than I would have if I had, if things had been different. And I'm sure even if I hadn't lost my parents, it'd probably be the same story. I don't think they would have. I think they would have probably been the same way, where it's like, no, you need to make money. And that's probably most people's parents. Let's be real. Um, but I don't know. I had my own issues. Like I, dealt with mental health struggles in my late teens and early 20s that I think also kind of held me back. I had a lot of depression. Um, I was really reclusive for a while. There was a period of time where, I mean, after I dropped out of college, I think there was like a solid year where I tried a little bit. I played some open mics here and there. And I really, if I didn't hold myself back so much at that time, I probably could have made a lot more progress and really gone places, you know, um, potentially. But I know that I kind of held myself back for a while at that point because I was just so, um, I just had a lot of negative self talk. I just felt really, I had like, I guess, like an inferiority complex or something. I would see all these other people who I felt like were way more talented, way more successful. And I was just, I would look at them and I would think, man, I'm never going to reach that. Like, why bother? Like I suck, and I also, was struggling at the time with trying to figure out, really trying to like pinpoint like my gender identity, and how to express that because like that was kind of another thing. Like I came from a very conservative family, and that's part of what makes it so funny to me now, like hearing all these conservative talk stations where they're like, oh, they're turning the kids like it's all brainwashing, they're turning kids trans. Because I'm like, man, I was like the opposite, man. I grew up around people who were very, Christian, conservative, old fashioned. Men are expected to be manly, women are expected to be feminine, and all the women in my family are ultra feminine and the men are ultra masculine. And I was like this weird in between, you know what I mean? And growing up, everybody was like, oh, you're a tomboy. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then once I got to be a teenager and I started, binding my chest and packing, I was like, I don't think tomboys do this. I don't think tomboys actually want to be boys sometimes, like, and even like when I was a kid, like I had little catchphrases, and one of my catchphrases was, I'm a man. Like I was asserting my dominance, my masculinity. And I remember one of my sisters, I forget which one, but one of them was like, there's people that actually do that. Like they become men. Like, is that what you're wanting to do? And I'm like, no, I don't, like, I'm not trying to go that far, whoa. And, so it was just really, I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know how to explain it. I just knew that I didn't fit, what was expected of me. And I didn't know how to express, accurately what I did feel, and to get people to see me the way I saw myself. And that was kind of something else I didn't really figure out until I was in probably my early to mid 20s. And I think that was also something that kind of hindered me because I was expected to be put, in this box that I just didn't fit in. And the more I tried to stuff myself in there, the more I felt like I was failing. I was bad at it. It felt unnatural. And it made me feel ugly. It made me feel inferior. Like it was all these things that, it wasn't until it took like multiple friends and therapists being like, it sounds like you're gender fluid. And I'm like, oh, no. Like that would make me trans. I'm not trans. Like I fought it for years because of this, again, like conservative upbringing I'd had. And, like it was so freeing. It was so liberating when I finally, I did the homework, I did the research, I looked into it, I looked at, I did some reflection, and I realized for me, it's like, oh yeah, that kind of is like, that sums it up. I'm non-binary, all that stuff, like gender non-conforming, all whatever you want to call it. Like I can't fit in one box or the other. That's just not my bag, And people who know me really well will even point out like, yeah, you're not you're more like a dude. Like guys see me as a dude. That was always an issue I had growing up, was like I never was seen, I was never like viewed as a girl, even though I was expected to be a girl. It was weird. It was this weird thing that I just, it didn't, and I feel like that kind of works against me too, because how do you sexualize that? Sex appeal is a big marketing thing, and it's a big turnoff to like a majority of straight people. The majority of the population is straight people. So straight people are gonna, if they can't figure out what gender you are, they're not gonna know whether they're attracted to you. They might be attracted to you, but they might be like, I don't know how to feel about this because I don't want to be gay. You know what I mean? Like it's a whole thing, and so it makes me hard to relate to in that regard, and it makes me hard to like sexualize, which is a big thing for instance, like commercials. That's a common appeal used in commercials, and when I'm auditioning for commercials, which are like most of the auditions I got through my agency, most of the time they're for one gender, and it's like, it's hard because commercials are meant to portray like everyday people, and it's when you don't have a lot of acting credits, that's kind of where a lot of people get their start, is in commercials. But it's like, how do you market somebody that people don't relate to, that are not, there's no mass appeal, there's no sex appeal. Like that's most of commercials, it's like, hi, I'm just like you, or hey, I'm so sexy, don't you want me? Like that's the two big things that make people in their little animal lizard brain be like, ooh, I want this now. And when I don't have that, what do you do with that? So I felt like those were kind of one of the big things that held me back personally, or I guess kind of obstacles for me. Another one, of course, is like a common one that I feel like most people have would be, financial barriers. I feel like that's a hard one because, without like, unless you want to take on tons of credit card debt, which I've been there too, getting the gear that you need to play shows, or, taking the classes, taking the lessons to get better at your craft. And that, goes towards like music or acting. You need to try to always be bettering yourself, or sharpening your tools, I guess. And with acting too, you have to pay for those. Like I went into more detail in my last video, paying for the seminars that, and networking opportunities, those always end up costing money. So when you're living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to, cover rent, like that's one of those things that I felt like, can be kind of a barrier. For me personally, another issue, which I'm sure a lot of other like aspiring creatives, depending on your own life, I still am a single parent. So, having to juggle that with, which I'm fortunate now that I have more help, I have more time, more resources than I used to. But for a time there, it was like I had very little help unless I basically paid for it. It's like when you have to be at home with your kid every night, 7 days a week, you can't go out to be, can't be going out to bars or going to see shows and networking or playing certain gigs, or gone, for days or weeks at a time, and, to take on, longer projects. Like it's out of the question. You have to, your time is very limited. And a lot of the times I would have to like sometimes take my kid with me, which is like less than optimal. I would only do if I had a trusted adult who could keep an eye on her while I was doing my thing. Cause I can't, you can't be on stage playing and also parenting or watching your kid. And, it's risky, and not something that I could do alone. That's something I would only do if I had help, but it really, that can be a hindrance or a limiting factor, I would suppose. It's something, I guess, like another thing that makes it a lot more difficult than if you were trying to make it work without a kid and you could still go out every night and network and everything. Which also, I feel like going to shows and bars and stuff like that, that's also expensive. That kind of factors into like the financial thing. Sometimes I would not go to shows, or, because I couldn't afford the cover charge, or I would feel obligated to buy drinks while I was there, and, or buy items from vendors if it was like a, collaborative kind of event. And it's, I'm a sucker for impulse buys. Like, I can't window shop. I will end up buying something. So I a lot of the times I would just miss out on opportunities just because I was like, I just can't afford it. I don't have the money for that kind of stuff. So those are some of the things that kind of held me back in one way or another, I guess you could say, or have been kind of obstacles I've personally dealt with. But, there have been a lot of positive things. The flip side of that, I would say, is that I've met so many really awesome people over the course of this whole journey. I've met people that I would consider mentors, teachers, friends that I've, been able to count on to help me with my projects and vice versa. Who I feel like they still continue to support me and that I still try to continue to support. And this includes people that I've worked on, in the past with previous projects. And I feel like, a lot of these experiences, even though they didn't pan out the way I thought they would, I still, consider those positives because they were experiences. I still got to, say I did some of the stuff, and they helped me learn and grow and kind of give me more perspective. And, I would say, like, even when things didn't work out, like, for instance, if there's like a project that I did where I never got paid, like, to this day, still have yet to get paid from it. I probably will never get paid for it. But I did meet people through that project that, have since offered me parts on other projects that are being handled by different companies that will hopefully pay me this time. And, or like, for instance, even though I never landed any roles when I was signed to an agency, I did, still attend some of their networking events, and I met people through that. And, those people, I've gotten involved with, they've invited me to like play, be involved in other things. And, it's like an ongoing, like, I've met people through that. Like, it's like a chain reaction, continuing effect. And it's like what they say, one door closes, another opens, so in some cases that door that opens more doors, you know what I mean? And so, it goes to show that even if things don't work out the way you expect, like, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes, it just means that maybe it'll open the door to something even better than what you had expected or initially planned for. And so that's kind of one of the lessons I've learned, is that it seems like success really just really comes down to who you know. And it's not always necessarily about being connected, starting out connected. I think part of it is just figuring out who to associate with and who to avoid. And hopefully, if you're at a point where you may feel like things are not working out for you right now, I mean, I would hope that this encourages you to, continue trying, not to give up, so that, maybe something will turn around. And if you are just getting started and you have all these plans and expectations for how things are going to go, hopefully this is a bit of a wake-up call that, hey, it's going to be harder than you expect. It's probably not going to work out the way you thought it would. But that might not be such a bad thing. It might be, even better than you imagined. And if nothing else, you'll get some good stories out of it, hopefully. I would say people who, even people who have connections, especially in light of like the Me Too movement and all this Epstein stuff, I would say people, especially people with connections, like, you never know who will end up, you might think they're great now, and they might down the line end up screwing you over. And they could use those connections against you if you try to hold them accountable. And even best case, like, if you make the right connections, it just depends on, a lot. Like, another big part of this industry is having the right look. So, if you think you have the look somebody says they want, they could still, you might think, like, say for instance, you get a part, you think like, oh, this is 100% me. You might still not get it. It might go to somebody who looks absolutely nothing like that. They might do a complete 180 and choose somebody that's the opposite, just because maybe that person, they were able to envision, a better, or, a different creative direction or something for that part. Or, for instance, like I could give an acting example for this that I encountered. actually the very first movie I ever auditioned for, back when I was, I think, like a teenager. I remember looking at the audition sides. They described this like punk rocker that had, like, I don't remember if it was like a buzz cut or like short hair, and it was like dyed like neon colors and lots of facial piercings and tattoos and just like punk rock. And at the time I had like long hair, no piercings, which I still don't have piercings, but like no tattoos, which now I have a few tattoos, but like just, my hair is a natural color. Like, I've never dyed it. There were so many things about that at the time that I was like, oh, I don't match this description. And I was thinking, like, do I need to get piercings? Do I need to even just get fake piercings? Do I need to dye my hair? Like, what will help me get this part? And, I ultimately was like, I'm not going to change anything permanent about myself for this role, because I don't for sure have it yet. But, I have a brother who was really into punk stuff as a teenager and got me into punk, the whole culture, as a kid. And so I kind of had some of the clothing. I had that down, and I could give the right attitude for that kind of character. And so, when I went to audition, I wore the clothes. I had the like punk persona. So I was hoping that would be enough to kind of get that point across. Well, ultimately, the person that got that part had like no punk qualities, attributes whatsoever. Like, was even more toned down than I was. And at least according to like the trailer, because I don't know if that movie ever actually came out. I all I ever saw was a trailer for it. I never saw any follow up, but from what I saw in the trailer, her character was not punk whatsoever. If anything, it was a lot more like hipster. Like, she was like, had like maybe like a scarf and, some like whatever. I don't know. I can't. It was like, imagine like hipster chick. That was what this character ended up being. There was nothing punk about it. No bright neon hair, no piercings or tats or like any of that stuff. Completely changed the character. And it's funny because I felt like I wasn't going far enough with my choices to be like as punk as they needed, and it turned out like I might have been too punk. Like, they might have turned out they didn't want punk at all. Like, and so in hindsight, like, I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't change all those things. I'm glad I tried to keep it as authentically me as I could, because that would have sucked. Like, if I hadn't gotten chosen, and then I did all these things to myself that I was like, great, I didn't really, like, I just did this for this part. At least at the end of the day, I could say I'm still authentically me. I showed up as myself, take it or leave it. In that case, they left it, and that's fine. And one of those things that, like, I've learned from just taking acting classes and just hearing other people talk that are in these industries, a lot of people have stressed the importance of authenticity. And it's at the end of the day, like, that's all you can do is just show up as yourself. And unless you're really great at lying and putting on an act, I'm not. Maybe that makes me a bad actor. I don't know. But I feel like people can usually tell when you're faking it. And so I just try to fake it as little as possible. Personally, that's kind of my thing. That's the advice I would give. It sounds cheesy, but that's like probably the best advice I would give for anybody in a similar situation who wants to make it in the like entertainment industry in general, music, acting, whatever, is to just stay true to yourself. And that will not only help you, not only help set you apart from other people, but it'll also help your chances of getting somewhere, because it'll help you have a better outlook. Like, it's just better for your mental health. It'll help you stay positive when things are really tough, and it'll help you just naturally weed out the people and the projects that don't fit with you. You're not having to force yourself, and if you have to keep up this facade of being somebody you're not for the sake of like success, it's gonna, that will, yeah, it might feel great at first because you're gonna see kind of these desired results from it, but after a while, like, I feel like that's gonna wear you down. And I feel like, part of that could be what, like, contributes to all these stories you hear about with, like, celebrities that just had, like, mental breakdowns and their lives just fell apart because they just got sick of putting on this act, or being stuck in this, like, people perceiving them as this thing that they don't relate to. They're like, that's not me. That wears on you after a while, I feel like. And I've been there, done that. Like, I tried, to do that, and it just didn't work out. And I honestly believe, in hindsight, had I been more comfortable in my gender identity at an earlier age, like talking like teenager, or younger, if I'd had the words for it, if I'd understood that, that I wasn't just this weird anomaly, that this is like an actual thing. And there's a whole community of people like that. I'm not just on this island. I'm not like this defective, like it's not something that I have to fix or change. Like, I can just embrace that. If I had owned it, if I'd learned how to really accept it and own it at an earlier age, and was able to treat that dysphoria that I felt sooner, I think I could have had better luck potentially getting somewhere, because I would have had this confidence, I would have had this positivity, I would not have struggled so much with, like, feeling broken or feeling ugly or feeling all these negative things, having all this negative self-talk, and just becoming a hermit and just closing up, holding up inside. I just, I would have been free to be more open, and really keeping an open, positive outlook is the best thing you can do, I think. Because people like being around positivity. Nobody wants to be around somebody that's just down on themselves all the time. Like, it's kind of a turnoff. And, I think, like, when I felt pressured to put myself in this box of, like, catering to these societal norms that did not work for me, very obviously, and just made me feel uncomfortable, and that I just, and other people were able to, like, feel that discomfort. They could sense that. It made them like, oh, and, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it makes sense. Like, I can't say I blame them, because it's like, if you're stuck between, if you have to choose between two people, and one person's just, like, owning it, confident, and they're, like, living authentically, and they're like, this is who I am, and they're just, like, positive, and the other person is just like Frankensteining this look together that they think you want, and they are obviously uncomfortable, and they're just kind of, like, awkwardly like, is this am I pretty? Like, is this what you want? Like, you're not going to want that. You're going to pick the one that's, like, owning it, and clearly, is like, I'm the take a whiff, and you're going to be like, don't mind if I do, and it's like, yeah, you might turn some people off that way. It might be too much for some people, but it's one of those, like, if they can't accept you for you, who needs them? You know what I mean? You're better off without them. And it's better to, take people who appreciate those parts of you, and that's something I've learned, even not even just with, like, the acting and music stuff, like, even, like, in life with friends or dating or any of that. Like, if somebody can't accept you for who you are, and they want you to change, like, aspects of yourself to please them or to be what they want, like, fuck them, who needs them? Better to find people who dig your vibe, That's at least how I see it. I just want to conclude this 2-part video by just saying the best piece of advice I can give, and it's something I try to follow as well. It's not easy, and it's super cheesy. I'm sure nothing new. Is to just never give up on your dreams, whatever it may be. There's a quote I've heard from various successful people, basically just saying that the difference between success and failure is just whether you stop trying. And at this point in time, I still have yet to achieve my dream of just earning a living as a creative without having to, do some sort of side hustle or, grind away at some corporate, whatever, 9 to 5. Um, and it's largely because of all the pitfalls I've described in this video. But also, just because I've always had to treat any creative endeavors as a hobby. And I'm sure many of you can relate. I've had to prioritize my time by putting family obligations first and financial obligations first. And it gives me very little time to pursue the creative opportunities to the extent that I would like. And my hope with this channel moving forward is I want to someday reach a point where I can ease my financial burdens and just free up that time to focus on all these creative projects that I'm passionate about. I mean, I enjoy not just music, but I also love to write. I love to draw. I mean, there's so many things that, there's just like in general, I have a lot of creative interests. I know anybody that's watching this, you're probably in a similar situation. It's not easy making a living doing that kind of thing, but it's possible. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who do that, just do what they are passionate about and make a living at it, whether it's creative or not. I mean, and if they can do it, why can't you? That's kind of the question I always ask myself. Like, all these people that like to say, oh, you can't do it. You got to, get a real job to pay the bills and all this sort of thing. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's the easy, safe, guaranteed way to go about it. But, if you want to win big, you got to risk big, And so, I mean, to that end, if I would be deeply appreciative if anyone who has made it this far, who's watched till the end, would consider subscribing to my channel, liking this video, and, commenting with more suggestions of just other topics you'd like for me to talk about. If there's, questions that you have that I didn't answer in these, please ask them, and I will try my best to answer them in a future video and or a comment, depending on how in-depth the answer is. And, if there's any song requests, anything you'd ever like to see me cover, put that too. And, I'm always looking for more songs to listen to and to learn. And that's, another thing I would say is just, keeping an open outlook, always be willing to learn more. Because it's a journey, you never really fully reach the destination. I feel like even people who've made it still are always challenging themselves. And I think that's really the kind of attitude you need to have to succeed. And if there's anything I've discussed that here or touched on that you want me to kind of go into more detail about, feel free to let me know. And yeah, thanks for watching. And I look forward to seeing all y'all in the next video.